This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. I feel like I'm always putting a disclaimer ahead of episodes, but this time I've genuinely been so unwell. Y'all, this month has really kicked my immune system in the butt. Like straight up, I have been unwell for like 3 weeks in a row. And so if I'm sounding really blocked up, if I'm sounding like I'm struggling to like catch my breath just a little bit, please just be warned that I have been unwell, but I am feeling a lot better. And it feels so good to be well enough to the point where I can actually sit down and record something for y'all. So thank you so much for tuning in. This episode, I really wanted to get political, especially with everything that's happening in the world right now. Things are just, I feel like the systems that we're living in are inflamed, right? It seems like we're getting to this point where people are demanding change, and when people want change, or when there are events that happen in the world that just kind of reveal how inflamed our systems are. And when I say inflamed, like, people are angry, people want change, or even if people don't want change, it seems like there is a lot of talk about, keeping the status quo. And this is this is not taken into effect, like, regardless of how you think politically or what your values are. I'm just speaking facts at the moment, right? Like, you open up the news and you can kind of summarize it into that, right? People really advocating and protesting for keeping the status quo, and people really advocating and challenging what the status quo looks like. And I think, we've got a really inflamed system at the moment. I'm talking about our systems of systems of racism, systems of whiteness, the system that is capitalism. Like, there's so many other systems that you can add to this, but when everything is so inflamed, there are so many different avenues in which people are trying to spread their values and, show that solidarity and that support. And so when that does happen, something that you keep hearing time and time again is, let's keep politics out of it. Like, when it comes to art, or when it comes to music, when it comes to sports, that symptom that is the inflamed system, of course it's going to show up in these areas. But you keep hearing that time and time again, keep politics out of it. And for me, how I think about things is there is no such thing as neutrality, and everything is political, whether we like it or not. And so I want to unpack this more, this idea of, keep politics out of it. And when we're saying that, what does that actually mean? And I wanted to start this episode by just going through some examples of where I've heard, keep politics out of it. And some of these things are happening in this day and age now. Some of these things have happened, but I think they're still relevant to the whole point of this episode. So let's start with sports, because I feel like when it comes to sports, especially sports, it seems like it is a particular hotbed for this keep politics out of it. Like, people really get caught up in their objections the most, I feel like, when it comes to sports. So starting here in Aotearoa, it is 1981. It is the Springbok Rugby Tour. Apartheid was very much happening in South Africa, and so when the Springboks came here for the tour, people across Aotearoa protested. People came out onto the streets to, stand up against that apartheid, and it got violent. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and it was quite when I was saying like the systems are inflamed, this was particularly inflamed because it caused a lot of division over whether or not the tour should go ahead, and a lot of supporters of the tour kept saying like, this is strictly sport, like how you need to keep the politics out of the rugby. But when you think about it, the tour, like, everything is political, and I feel like to have that tour take place, it's like a way that a rugby is being used to normalize a country that was built on racial segregation. Another sports example that I have, and I just know that I'm going to say this last name incorrectly. Y'all can tell that I really didn't personally. I do not keep up with sports, but Colin Kaepernick, and y'all please correct me if I said that incorrectly, but he took the knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality against black people, and the response to that was crazy again. And like, the response to that just showed the system's very, very inflamed, and this is a very inflammatory moment. He literally lost his career over it. Politicians stepped in, called him unpatriotic, and a lot of people, particularly fans, were saying like, sports is not the place for politics. But if we just think about things objectively for a second here, standing for the anthem, is that not political? Wearing a flag, is that not political? So then, in that case, going with the status quo and, being silent, is that also not a political choice as well? So I think the difference here is that, so what kind of politics is comfortable? What politics can, has kind of got the stamp of approval from the system and something that we can all engage with comfortably. So, and I think that's what I'm trying to say here, why everything is political. The difference is, what is it, the politics that is comforting, or is it uncomfortable? And, this criticism of keep politics out of it, it doesn't just show up in sports, it shows up in other areas too. And I thought that this example was so interesting in the sense that it's just so in your face, what kind of politics is allowed and what isn't. So let's so there's this artist in America, Amy Sherald, who reimagined the Statue of Liberty, the classic New York icon, or the iconic icon, sorry. the Statue of Liberty reimagined as a black trans woman. And, this reimagination was called Transforming, you hear it? Liberty. And so the Smithsonian considered, removing her painting because there was a lot of pressure. And in the end, Amy Sherald was like, you know what? We're not arguing over this anymore because I'm just going to withdraw the reimagination of the statue entirely. And so when you think about what that reimagination of Statue of Liberty was saying, it's all about identity and visibility and who is it that gets to represent, the American ideal or the American dream or the American values. And so for that reimagination to have so much, to generate so much political pressure, I don't know, it just makes you think again about, where is this censorship coming from? And I don't think that the criticism of keep politics out of it holds any weight in that. And then we can talk about pop culture. I feel like there's so many examples in pop culture, but one that comes to mind is Beyonce's Super Bowl performance. I can't remember what year it was, but it was the formation part specifically. And Beyonce, she referenced Hurricane Katrina, she referenced the Black Panthers, she highlighted police brutality, and again, another point of inflammation. People were not happy, and there was a lot of criticism again of why bring politics into music. But you have to understand that this is okay. Again, I can't 100% speak on Beyonce's reasoning for this, but I'm gonna take an educated guess at the fact that she is a black woman. That performance was rooted in her blackness, and the fact that performance gave her a lot of visibility on one of the biggest cultural stages. I mean, even if you don't like the sports, you have no idea who's playing. That is me. I identify in that group. People, look forward to the halftime performance. It's a thing. It's one of America's biggest cultural stages. And so there's a lot of visibility to bring light to things that aren't often spoken about. But the criticism there of, why bring politics into music, again, it doesn't hold much water weight. And then we can kind of think about this criticism, keep politics out of it when it comes to workspaces. There are so many examples of companies and institutions disciplining their employees for expressing solidarity with Palestine, especially in the past 2 years. You have seen time and time again, or you hear it a lot in the news, social media, people being disciplined for expressing their solidarity with Palestine, and it's always, work isn't the place for politics. But this one is really interesting to me because that banning voices in itself is a political act, right? Because in doing that, these companies and these institutions are saying, we're protecting our interests, not our employees, which I think interesting. And as of late, well, not as of late, I feel like it's been going on for a long time, but it just seems like there's, people are getting bolder in their criticisms against the use of te reo Māori, whether it's like in meetings, in the classrooms, and I don't know, even just in general day-to-day life. There's a lot of there's a large, I'm not going to say large, but there is a percentage of people who just are not happy about this usage of te reo Māori. And one of the criticisms you hear time and time again is that it's too political. But again, let's think about this objectively. Only teaching in English, only speaking in English, that is also a political choice too. Think about what that choice says and what it aligns with. Because it aligns with the colonial status quo. Because if you think about it, we have 2 official languages in this country. And so, for there to consistently be backlash when te reo is used, and whatever context it's used in, for that to be criticised as being too political or too much, it definitely makes you think, right? And so I hope even with these examples, you've kind of picked up the themes there, that everything is political. It just depends on, what that choice aligns with. Because, when we really picked it out, even any choice is political. Nothing is truly neutral. It just depends on, with that political choice, who is protected, who gets served, and does it cause any discomfort. So, yeah, even from those examples, I hope you've been able to see that everything is political. Nothing is ever neutral. And, there are so many reasons why you can say everything is political. And I think the first reason there is that power is literally everywhere. And it's not just about like the literal politics that's happening at Parliament, but when you think about power in general, it's about who gets what, who gets seen, whose voice matters, who is seen for their full humanity. Like, that is politics too. It's not just this narrow definition of literally what happens in the House, in Parliament. It's about that power and how is that power distributed in our systems, and that is politics. And whether or not you're aware of it, like, your life is, again, I'm not saying that this power is everything, because I can understand and I know that, you can have certain privileges. It doesn't automatically mean that your life is easier, and it doesn't automatically mean that you'll never go through any hardship in life. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is that when with us living in this power, with us living in this system, it's something that, whether or not you realize it, it shapes who you are to a certain extent. It shapes, what privileges you have or don't have in your life. And so that is political. Because if you think about who you are as a person and you think about your journey in life, if we really think about it metaphorically, if we are in the big wide ocean, we are in a little boat, and where we end up is kind of like where the direction of our life goes. very much one of those currents that's either pushing or pulling, is this power, which manifests as privilege or lack thereof. And those currents are pushing you or not in a particular direction in your life. And so, whether or not you are aware of that, or if you fully unpack that for yourself, it's happening to you. That is politics. Politics is always happening to you. And I think another thing that kind of relates to that thread as well is that the personal is political. And I think where this idea really got wind and people ran with it is the feminist movement, especially in the 60s and the 70s, and that phrase was used a lot because that phrase, the personal is political, it very much showed how things like housework and childcare and fashion actually were reflections of the systems of power, and they weren't just personal choices. Because these things that are personal, just because they are personal, it doesn't mean that it's an entirely personal choice. These quote-unquote personal things are very much influenced and shaped by the systems of power that I was talking about. For example, when it comes to housework and childcare, the patriarchy is very much kind of reinforced this idea that women are in charge, not in charge, because patriarchy tells us that we don't have any power in that sense, but the expectation is women do everything around the house, and that may seem like a personal choice because it's housework and it's centered around your personal house, but that is very much related to the systems of power. And I think, even though this phrase really took wind in the 60s and 70s, it's something that is very much relevant to this day. And it's something that I encourage you to do for yourself. Think about any personal choice in your life. If you could either write it down, or you could ask yourself, or you could have this conversation with someone that you love and you trust. And if you said whatever this personal choice was, and you kept asking yourself, why, or where is that coming from? If you really get deep with it, and I reckon you ask yourself why, 3 to 5 times, you'll get to that, system of power. Everything is very much political. Just talking about the feminist movement, when I read, and I'm going to forget the author's name now, but the book was called Hood Feminism, and it was talking about how feminism, there's white feminism that doesn't really account for the intersectionality of what it means, the myriad of ways that being a woman can be experienced in this world, and how white feminism, it may come across as progressive because it's advocating for the improved rights, and it's advocating for equity for women. It still operates within the system of whiteness. And so if you are having the experience of being a woman that isn't a white woman, then white feminism doesn't actually serve you at all. And so I just remember this book talking about how this, this white, quote unquote white feminism, which didn't account for intersectionality, how that there was a difference in experience between, white women and POC, so people of colour, POC women, and a lot of those differences showed up in things that are considered like very personal choices, like childcare and housework and fashion and, things that are considered quite personal. This book really cracked everything open, and it just made you see that everything is political, and even if something isn't considered political, everything is. And so for these systems of power to be present, and if it influences or shapes who we are, what we do, how we think, of course that's going to show up in everything that we do. And when I say everything, I really mean it. And that means our sports, and that means our art, and that means our music. It's not just like, if these systems of power is everywhere, it's not just going to weirdly manifest in Parliament or when it comes to election time. It manifests everywhere, because it is everywhere. And I think when we live in a reality where we kind of deny that everything is political, it kind of sets up this dynamic where the silence or neutrality benefits the powerful, or it benefits the status quo. And so by not speaking, or by staying neutral, or, by telling people to essentially be quiet whenever we say, keep politics out of this, it keeps things exactly as they are. And I think that's where the myth of neutrality really gets busted, right? Because there's no such thing as being neutral. Neutral just means, keeping the status quo as it is. And actually, another thing that I wanted to say about why everything is political, because often when you hear that, we need to keep politics out of it, it's not just about the music or the sports or the art. It's also about symbols, right? It's about flags, it's about anthems, it's about uniforms, and even the languages that we speak. But you have to understand that even symbols carry weight. Symbols reflect that power, because they all carry those histories of power. And so because they carry those, they carry the weight, or they reflect those systems of power, all of those symbols are also political as well. And on that note of the dangers of being neutral, I know that we've heard this time and time again, but it's so relevant to what's being said at the moment. Our Queen, Angela Davis, homegirl, once said that, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We need to be anti-racist. And so, again, it's just kind of emphasizing that point that neutrality, doesn't cut the mustard, and neutrality, it's not truly a thing. Neutrality isn't neutral. Neutrality just keeps the status quo. And another, just copying words from other awesome human beings, another quote that really, really reinforces this point is that Paulo Freire, who I feel like I always say this wrong incorrectly. It's one of those words that I've always just had to read, but I've never had to say out loud. So if I've said it incorrectly, y'all, please let me know. But Paulo Freire in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed said, made a point that, education is never neutral. It either reinforces domination or challenges it. So again, that point that, neutrality isn't being neutral. Neutrality is maintaining the existing status quo and maintains the existing systems of power. So, yeah, there is no such thing as neutrality. I am always so curious, why people say just keep politics out of it. And I think, there is a line between politics that is comforting. And when I say comforting in the sense that it aligns with the current systems of power and it aligns with the priorities of those systems. And then there's politics that challenges those systems of power. And when there is that challenge, there is that discomfort. And when we think about this is just my observation, my 2 cents, is that whenever I have heard that criticism of keep politics out of it, is usually because there's discomfort there. And I think when there is that discomfort, it's easier to say keep politics out of it than to engage and to understand, why that discomfort exists. But I think another thing that makes it really easy to say keep politics out of it, or just, and not just to say keep politics out of it, something that makes it easy to think that everything isn't political is privilege. And I think the reason why for that is privilege offers this comfort. And when there is this comfort there, it's really easy to believe in the myth of neutrality. Because, think about it, right? If your rights, your language, and your safety are never questioned, it's really easy to think that spaces and places and the systems that we exist in are apolitical. And so it would be really hard to see how everything is political in that sense. Like if we, cast our minds back to the Springbok tour, and there was that privilege that gave you that comfort, and so all you wanted to do was just watch the game, you would not be thinking about the Black South African whose humanity was literally on the line. You wouldn't be thinking about it from that point of view. And so I think this is, there are so many reasons why it's important to explore privilege and how it actually shows up in your life. And I think this is one of the many reasons why, because once that comfort is, or that false comfort, because that's what it is, it's not actually comforting, but if you take away that false comfort, it's really hard to ignore the fact that everything actually is political, because you're seeing how those systems of power, they show up everywhere. And so I think it's really important to really get so for real and so deep about how privilege shows up in your life. And I feel like every single time I talk about privilege, I'm always putting that disclaimer out there, and I will do it, and I will keep on doing it. I understand that, privilege is not a one fixed thing. There are so many ways that you can and cannot have privilege in your one being. And every single time I put out this disclaimer, I can only ever really talk about myself, because that's all I can really talk about. But, there are some ways where I do have privilege, and some ways that I don't have privilege. And I think, especially when I first got into this space, I think I very much found it hard to think about the fact that I might have privilege in some spaces, because I'm a Black Muslim woman, but actually there are spaces where I do have that privilege, and I'm privileged in having access to education, privilege. Actually, I feel like if I really get deep into the places that I have privilege, it brings up other people's stories, which I feel like I can't comment on. But there are many ways that I do have privilege, and that's okay. I think what I'm trying to say is that it's usually not black and white. Everyone has their own experience when it comes to privilege. But I think the reason why I brought this up is because privilege is one of those things where it's like a concept that it's really easy to to understand, or to think that you've understood it. But I think with what the hard work is when it does come to privilege is really understanding how it shows up or doesn't show up in your life. And when you think about the ways that it shows up in your life, it's so specific, and it's so eye-opening when you've really made it personal to your life, which is why I was saying before, to really get into the ways that privilege does show up in my life, it brings up two personal things that will highlight other people in my life, and I, out of respect for them, I can't talk about that. But when you really get so for real about how privilege shows up in your life, I think that's where the significant transformation shows up, because it requires significant work. It requires significant work to reveal that to yourself. But when you have done that work, the false comfort that is there because of privilege really pops. But I really do believe that privilege is a really big barrier as to, why people even say keep politics out of it to begin with. And as I was saying before, I think another reason why that it's quite, people do say keep politics out of it is that sense of discomfort, because it is much easier to criticize or dismiss the protester or the person who has created that art or, done whatever they have done, the protester, than to ask yourself, where is this discomfort coming from? What role do I play in this system? And so I think discomfort is a huge part of it. I think another reason is this fear of division, because if you think about workplaces and especially sports institutions, right, because it is all of us, we're all cheering for this team, we're all one, that vibe. But I think, if there's no justice, if there's the unity there but there's no justice, that doesn't even equate to anything. It's just empty. all it is, that unity is literally just vibes. It's just vibes with a sprinkling of inequality there. And so I think there's this real fear of division. But I think, this fear of, I feel like unity and the role that it has to play in social cohesion and social justice, that could be an episode on its own. But I think there's very much this fear of division there that exists. And I hate to be that person that brings up capitalism, but I think, capitalism benefits a lot when that narrative of everything is political is invalidated time and time again. Because if you think about capitalism, just wants to sell everything to everyone. And so, the appeal of appearing apolitical is of huge benefit. But that is also political too. It's just the politics of profit. So, there are so many reasons, but I think neutrality, it feels comfortable, but not for everyone. And I think I really wanted to talk about the myth of neutrality when we are talking about, when people say keep politics out of it, because the myth of neutrality it's this false comfort here, right? Neutrality, what it's really saying is don't rock the boat. But what we really need to be asking ourselves is, who owns the boat? Who's steering that boat? And who's stuck rowing with no life jacket? Like, for example, if we think about the recent decision from the government to reduce, because that's a lie. They've removed, not just reduced, removed Māori words from early reader books. On the surface, it's very much, being framed as like, this is just all about literacy. Like, we want to get our kids' literacy rates up. This has nothing to do with the politics. Like, we just want a better education for our kids. But again, that decision to erase Te Reo Māori, that is a political decision, and that reinforces the system of colonialism that is very much present in today here in Aotearoa. And I think another example of where neutrality kind of steps in is, you see it a lot when it comes to the news and journalism. And like, it's the double standards. It's just, the constant double standards, right? Even the double standards when it comes to reporting the current genocide. But if we're just thinking about things more generally, I feel like you always see headlines of like clashes erupt between, police and protesters. And that neutrality kind of frames both sides as equal, but, that, false equality or that balance really hides the injustice, right? Because it makes the oppressor and the oppressed seem the same when there isn't. There's this injustice there. Maybe just to go back to that headline I said, maybe we can just say, clashes erupt between the oppressor and the oppressed. And the double standards there, most of the time, it clouds that injustice or that power imbalance that exists. And I would love to do a separate episode on this about the critical race theory. But, the critical race theory teaches us and tells us that law and policy often present themselves as neutral, But neutrality is built on racialized hierarchies. So what is quote unquote normal is political too. So, neutrality doesn't break the cycles of injustice, it keeps them spinning. So, I know that this episode has been hella meaty and hella juicy, but what are the golden nuggets that I would love for y'all to take away? Because I hope with this show that, you're a little bit entertained, you're learning a bit, but you also feel like, you can take away some things that you can, actually action, and keep, re-looking at the lens in which you view this world. So first of all, I think just being able to reflect. So, the next time that you do hear, keep politics out of it, just ask yourself who benefits from pretending that this is neutral. And again, even just saying that out loud, I'm like, oh, discomfort, I can feel it in my body. But it's important to kind of push through that discomfort, and really think about who benefits from pretending that this is neutral. Another thing is speaking up, and this doesn't have to be in big ways. It can show up just quietly, imperfectly in your personal life, but silence can feel safe, but neutrality will always protect that power. So I think that's why that silence feels safe. So speaking up rocks the boat. So whether it's like challenging a joke or insisting on te reo pronunciation, or asking why not, or challenging the headlines that you read. Every single time you speak up, it chips away at that myth of neutrality. And I think another way we can challenge the myth of neutrality is, don't be so quick to dismiss activism as being too political. If there are things that make you mad, glad, sad about the world, and there's a kaupapa behind that, absolutely join in, donate, or amplify, or show up in whatever way that you want, because often how you feel reflects what you care about in this world, and so follow that, and follow any kaupapas that support that in any way that you feel like fits into your life. And I think the last thing that I wanted to say, and it might seem like a bit of a tangent, is that I think the thing about neutrality is that it takes it tries to take the joy out of politics, but joy is also a form of resistance too. And so whether it's like food or laughter or dancing or solidarity, bring that joy back into politics again. I think the myth of neutrality really takes that away from anything political. So yeah, hopefully those are nuggets that you can take away with you. Thank you so much for joining into this episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. I think for me, the thing that I really want to impress to y'all with this episode is that neutrality is a myth, and everything is political, because power is literally everywhere. And so, when you do hear like keep politics out of it, it's, because there's that discomfort there, and it wants we want to keep that status quo. And so, even for myself, I've been told so many times, like, don't make it about race or don't make it about the hijab. But, the truth of the matter is that those things are political. So why should we not speak on it? So, keep asking, keep speaking, keep finding the joy, keep pushing through that discomfort. And thank you for tuning into this episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. Catch you for the next one.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.